Body horror is gross, but I find it fascinating. The aspect I find most interesting is what makes body horror most scary. Frightening, disturbing, something worse than death. The loss of the human. A prime example would have to be John Carpenter's critically acclaimed The Thing. At this point, the topic has been talked to death, but in it, we come to understand that a dog is being hunted by a helicopter across the ice of the Antarctic, and a group of American researchers take in the dog after dispatching the seemingly hostile Norwegian. The Americans don't know what to make of this. Why was the man so intent on killing the dog that he'd shoot through a group of people just to get to it? Over the course of time with the dog being with the Americans, it slowly revealed why the dog should have been taken care of in the first place. It turns out the dog is an alien creature from another world that can take the form of whatever it absorbs. It's through the Thing's method of transformation and mutation of the human body that lends body horror its horror. Body horror is gross. It's supposed to make you feel discomfort, almost physically ill by what you're witnessing. The unsightly, inhuman contortions, movements, incomprehensible limits that are being pushed onto the human form is what's most terrifying. The sense of there shouldn't be a mouth where the stomach is. While body horror is scary, you know what you're getting yourself into when you decide to watch a horror film. But what about when body horror is present where it shouldn't? Finding body horror where horror has no business being can elevate those feelings of horror. For instance, video games. Now I know video games are no stranger to horror. Horror games have been a thing for a long time now. However, I'm referring to video games that shouldn't have any sort of horror elements or should be known as a horror game. Grand Theft Auto 4, a staple of the GTA series and beloved by the community. It garnered some DLC with 2 new characters to play as with their respective stories. Along with the main character of Nico Bellic, you also have The Lost and Damned with Johnny Klebitz, and The Ballad of Gay Tony with Luis Lopez, all of which take place on the island of Liberty City, basically New York. It's got everything from the Empire State Building, Brooklyn Bridge, Times Square, Central Park, and the Statue of Liberty. Anyone that has played GTA 4, their ears have just perked up and eyes widened, for they just remembered there's a secret with the Statue of Liberty, or better known as in-game as the Statue of Happiness. I recently watched Wendigoon's video analysis of the Monument Mythos, a video series on YouTube where the premise is that strange happenings and monsters are being held within the various historical monuments of the United States, almost as if the monuments themselves are alive. With that in mind, there's a door one can access on the pedestal of the Statue of Happiness by means of helicopter. Once inside, there's a ladder you can use to climb. And once on the platform, it's revealed that the statue is alive. A live, beating heart within a game with no themes of horror to be had, held up by chains and actual arteries and veins seemingly pumping life-giving blood to this piece of otherwise metal, organic within inorganic. The lifeless statue resembling the human form given personified false humanity with one of the organs that keep the body alive. It makes you think, why is this here? Why is the statue alive? Was the statue ever human? The GTA series hasn't been afraid of sprinkling in paranormal and otherworldly aspects into their games. But regardless, there's no explanation why this heart is here and chained up suspended in the air. So one can interpret this as an example of body horror. Except that it isn't. It's shocking, yes, but body horror, no. GTA 4's giant beating heart would be more akin to shock horror. It's an assault on the eyes, but nothing more. I explained how body horror is supposed to make you feel, and let's go a little more in depth on what it is. A new parasite has taken hold of the population. Not only that, but the parasite gains sentience exponentially as infection increases. The mere knowledge of what it does to the host is enough to make a better alternative. The process of the infection is rapid, taking seconds for the virus to take hold of the human body, reconstructing it down to the molecular level to better suit its needs. Bones are grown past the limit of elasticity the skin can withstand, tearing through the fingertips into sharp weapons. The head is cast aside, dangling, and replaced with heightened sensory antennae. The skin is turned to a rotten green, for the parasite has no need for blood, only spores to spread itself. The human body wasn't meant to undergo this harsh and perverse transformation against its will. Body horror, to put it simply, is what the worst thing that could happen to the human body in the most unfathomable way. And what's scary is imagining how horrible an existence would be if it happened to you.
Keys, Jacob. Oh, God, it hurts!
This very parasite plagues the universe of the Halo games, making its first appearance in Halo Combat Evolved in one of the most atmospheric levels to introduce an iconic villain. Up until this, you've been shooting down Covenant forces, driving your Warthog, and saving fellow soldiers. There's no indicators of any body horror. This is just a first-person shooter after all. You notice enemies running in fear from something, blood everywhere, until you find the helmet of a fellow soldier, his body nowhere in sight.
I got a bad feeling about...
Give you an order!
Sarge! There are too many...
Taken!
Suddenly you're attacked by deformed and repugnant living corpses of your enemies and allies being puppeted by this parasite, the Flood. You strafe and run because you don't know what this new enemy is capable of. If they got too close, you don't want to end up like them. Similarly, there are numerous enemies in Elden Ring that are the very definition of body horror. A clear instance of Godric and his crafted scions. Just by the sheer sight of Godric himself, how else could you tell? His body is a violation of the human body. It's not supposed to have all those limbs, especially haphazardly strewn about his figure. He even shoves his severed limb into the back skull of a dragon corpse, in what seems to be a painful process. Now, I understand this is within the realm for a game as Elden Ring. With over-the-top, larger-than-life bosses, something like Godric is to be expected. But what about a game with a younger audience? Nintendo is home to many iconic and recognizable mascots that make up their success among younger audiences. Asking anyone about Nintendo would surely bring about happy memories and pleasant experiences with their multitude of games. Have you heard of Mario? And while these games are made for children, let's not forget, these games were made by adults. Star Fox 64. I've put hours upon hours into this game back then. I loved figuring out the different ways to travel to the different planets on the map. Some planets required you to fulfill some unforeseen side missions on the planet before it. If you wanted to branch off a different path from the first planet you play, Corneria, you can travel to either Sector Y or Medio. If you beat Corneria normally, you would go to the latter. However, if you save Falco from the enemies pursuing him, then fly under all the archways later in the level, Falco will urge you to follow him into the waterfall where you will fight the alternate boss. With that out of the way, the objective of the game is to defeat the final boss that has been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs of various enemies and experiments in the form of bioweapons. The way you go about doing that is traveling from point A to point B. Every run is different and you won't visit all the planets in one playthrough, which is probably why I enjoyed the game so much. Yet, you'll always end up at the same planet in the end. Venom. It's the home to the big bad you've been chasing all this time. Andros, the evil scientist, presumably driven mad by his experiments, lies in wait and mocks you as you make your way through the labyrinth of tunnels to his lair. The whole time, this kid-friendly rail shooter of a game has built up your final fight against the main force of evil, and from the inky, black darkness, a shadow appears. and quickly reveals. Until now, you've only come across other NPCs with or assumed human proportions. Due to his biotechnology experiments, Andros has been reduced to a floating disembodied head and hands. He has now become like one of his own experiments, his own bioweapon. If it wasn't bad enough, after destroying his limbs and attacking his head for a while, his very skin explodes off.
Only I have the brains to rule my life.
His true form being just his brain and eyes. For the whole fight, Andros chases you down with his eyes while his brain hangs back due to his slow movement. He will also let off what look like to be literal meatballs and teleport around the arena. Adding to the body horror, where his brainstock should be is a mass of tendrils that, if caught in, will begin to tear your ship to pieces. Many kids playing this back in the day had their first experience of body horror here. This universe establishes that there are human-like beings similar to us in anatomy, and at the same time those same beings can be reduced to this, even going further to expose the anatomy of the brain in its naked form, cerebellum and all. A fate worse than death, stripped of the very things that define a bipedal life form. There are many horror games that have body horror elements, just Google it, but it's different to see it out of place. Throughout Star Fox, you're not worried all too much about dying because the atmosphere is set so you don't have to worry about much. There are no complex game mechanics, the game literally holds your hand and guides you down a straight path towards the end. For the majority of the game is a bullet hell, but when the game lets go, like taking off your training wheels, now you're more in control in these open arenas where the interaction between you and your enemy is a game of cat and mouse, until the mood changes. Now your victory is fueled by not wanting to be near the thing you're supposed to destroy, being chased down by a mutilation of what once was. Now let's talk zombies. They are used to death, and are an example of body horror as well. Do you remember the first time playing COD Zombies? There are countless memes that perfectly capture the feeling of playing COD Zombies when you were a little kid. By the way they move, the sounds they make, and most importantly, how they look. Zombies are relentless in the fact that their sole goal is to eat you by any means. In that sense, broken bones or loss of limb won't stop them. That's where the body horror comes into play. They aren't concerned with pain, so limbs can be broken to degrees a human isn't able to, whether that be with dealing with the pain or the multitude of contortions and trauma zombies are able to put themselves through. And they're everywhere in games to the point we've become desensitized. What about in Conker's Bad Fur Day? This disgusting and crude humor game is nice and bright, and it's got fart jokes. Basically every 7-year-old's sense of humor, until you reach the graveyard, where you'll come across swarms of zombies. I remember handing the controller over to my cousin because I was too afraid of getting too close, and dreading the thought of whether or not I'd be able to escape their grasp. I'm sure if I was grabbed, I'd meet a game over screen, as I would panic and not know which buttons to press. The game took a turn. As soon as it became night, you knew the game was about to throw something at you that wasn't a poop joke. Now let me return to Halo for a second. I know I stated that Halo Combat Evolved was the first time the Flood was introduced, however, that wasn't the first time the Flood was introduced to me. Actually, it was the third installment of the series, as I played the series out of order. In the Halo 3 mission, Floodgate, we get to see a weird looking ship come out of slipspace and crash land. Me being a child, I didn't know what this meant. I didn't give any thought, I have no prior knowledge to this. But as I began to hear screams of terror coming from my fellow soldiers, my fellow allies, I knew something took a turn for the worst. Seeing how the Flood was able to morph and transform into different versions of itself was unsettling and foul. I didn't want to be the one dying to one of them because I knew my beloved Master Chief would be defiled and transfigured into one of those monsters, even if the game never showed it. Body horror is gross. It makes you cringe at the sight of dislocated, twisting bones, unbelievable bodily trauma, and remnants of the human form barely recognizable. Some games play on the thought that the human side is still alive, living within the nightmare, forever trapped in a state of torture. Some play on the most disgusting and repulsive imagery the body can produce. Either way, body horror will always be worse when it's unsuspected. If you stuck this far into the video, thank you. It means a lot. I know I may have not covered every instance of unsuspected horror in video games and may have left out a game you know. And if so, leave it in the comments and consider subscribing. I hope to see you in my next hyperfixation.